Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and I'm hustling with the Hustlers. Yeah! All right, have fun, guys. All right, so today we're going to talk about one of my favorite buildings in Baltimore, the Hutzler Brothers Palace Building. And it was the cornerstone of Baltimore's pedestrian retail district for over 100 years. And it was the face that launched a derailed series. And speaking of faces, this building is absolutely covered in them. There are all manner of green men and other beasties staring down at Howard Street like it's their job, right? Which it may be, because Howard Street is the entrance to Howard's Woods. And all these sadorific Diana-worshipping shenanigans going on in Mount Vernon. And so is this merely a coincidence that all these green men are sitting pretty just a half mile or so from where this entrance would be? And there are so many faces on the front of this building that even the filigree of this arch has faces. And you just know that this green man motif was carried out on all the other open faces of this building. Right? So who knows what else could have been on there? This location near the entrance to Howard's Woods is amazing because it allows me to cast the Hutzler Brothers department store as a clandestine outpost for the demons, human or otherwise, coming and going from Howard's Woods. Remember, the name of the town is Baltimore. So besides all the Diana worshipping going on, there's also some good old-fashioned Baal worship going on too. And you know what that means. That's right. Baby killing. Baal loves himself some ritual child sacrifice. And so while on the surface, Hutzler Brothers may appear to be just another department store, but maybe if you're from out of town, in quotes, and you have some business, also in quotes, in the woods, well then you might know to go to the sign of the Green Man and ask for Abram G., who was running Hutzler's like he was Al Swearingen running the Gem Saloon. And he would show you to a special room where you could fill any last-minute ritual sacrifice needs you may have. And so when you're a false paradigm speculator building a story around a cult of Baal and Diana worshippers running the whole shebang out of Baltimore, well, this setup is just too perfect. And it's made especially sweet by the fact that the Hutzlers were Jewish. Because in Mud City, Yahweh is really Baal in disguise. And again, just too perfect. Mud City loves all of this fantastic speculation for Baltimore, because this is having fun with the lies. But Mud City likes it even more when the story goes beyond this, as the story of the Hutzler Brothers Palace Building does. Because this building plays no small part in the story of what some see as the far-left progressive agenda designed to keep the fragile fractals all agitated, right? Because not only did Abram G's father Moses float him that loan to open his dry goods store, but some 15 years or so before that, in 1842, when the Hutzlers were really just fresh off the boat, Moses Hutzler organizes the first Reformed Jewish congregation in the United States in Baltimore. And the Reform movement is a sect of Judaism that greatly, if not disproportionately, influences the more liberal and progressive ideologies of the Democratic Party today. And what's really amazing about Moses Hutzler starting the first Reformed Jewish congregation in America is that he does so concurrent to the formation of the movement itself, which starts in Germany and doesn't get off the ground until the 1830s with the work of Rabbi Abraham Geiger and his constituents. And so now, unfortunately, the gatekeepers are silent on Moses Hutzler's doings in Germany before he emigrates to Baltimore in 1839. But he's almost 40 years old and has lived a life by this point. And so if he's starting a branch of Reform Judaism less than 3 years after showing up in Baltimore and being from Germany, then it stands to reason that Moses either knew personally or at the very least was well acquainted with the work of Radioactive and his constituents and their reforms. Reforms that regard Jewish law as non-binding and the individual Jew as autonomous. this creates a great openness to external influences and progressive values. This is the 1830s, 1840s. And so, until I learn otherwise, this is the first example of identity politics in action. Because what this Reformed Jewish doctrine does is it makes it okay to identify as a good Jew without having to do good Jew stuff, like go to shul or observe the Sabbath or eat kosher foods. Reformed Jews believe that they and Yahweh have an understanding, apparently having learned nothing from Yahweh's past vengeful ways. It's also interesting, too, that in the beginning, Reformed Judaism was decidedly anti-Zionist, because if the body was the temple, then what did they need a building in Jerusalem for? But this has changed over time, right? Because of course it has. And, but I don't know. It's just so amazing to me that this green man covered building was built for Reformed Jews, clearly not worried about graven images because Judaism is of course just Reformed Baal worship. And I have horned gods prancing around Howard's Woods, half a mile away. But it just seems too conveniently coincidental to me that Abram G. is able to build this dry goods retail empire out of a very well-established and crowded retail marketplace, and his father just so happens to start a similarly successful Reformed Jewish congregation just some 15 years earlier. My fat senses are all over this, right? And both things may have been made possible by the Maryland Act for the Relief of the Jews, which passed in 1826. And so what this act did was it gave Jewish people the right to vote and hold public office, which they hadn't had before. And so while I saw nothing to suggest that any of the Hutzlers held office, that doesn't mean that they didn't have a hand in the political machinations of Baltimore City and the state of Maryland. And what really set this off for me was noticing the correlation between the dates of Moses starting Har Sinai and the origins of Reformed Judaism itself. This act makes Baltimore the ideal landing spot for those looking to expand their reforms. Because at the time, Baltimore had a much softer Jewish presence than the other larger cities in America like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. So there would be fewer Orthodox Jews to get in the way. And this also leaves the door open for a little under-the-radar complicity from the Catholic Church and the Church of England, who may or may not have had ideas of their own for some of these liberal and progressive ideas. I don't know, it just feels like there's something there. But to bring it back to the building, the story gets even better because the Hutzler Brothers Palace building was designed by none other than the architectural firm of Baldwin and Pennington, the house architects, in quotes, for the B&O Railroad, who designed and built many train stations for that great company. And the Pennington half of Baldwin and Pennington is none other than our boy Rawhide Josias Pennington, one of my ghosts in the machine, who may or may not be his own grandfather, who was president of the board of trustees for the Peabody Institute, which is busy shaping culture into a mind control device at this time, right? And its patron, George Peabody, is, spoiler alert, also patron of Yale's Peabody Museum. And so this connection between the Palace Building and the Peabody Institute is very interesting. And let's not forget that Rawhide also may or may not have had something to do with the untimely death of rival architect Douglas Thomas Jr., who stole the new B&O Railroad headquarters building contract away from Baldwin and Pennington. And this is also a building with lots and lots of faces on it, including the Lady of Elk. There are just so many layers to the story of the Hutzler Brothers Palace building that it's really incredible. And perhaps no more incredible a layer than the latest, because the story of the Hutzler Brothers Palace building doesn't end when the store closes in 1989. Though the city of Baltimore would like you to think it does, the way it gets treated. Because beneath this graffitied facade and piss-covered sidewalk, there lies a data center that is home to 25% of the world's internet traffic in what used to be the basement cafeteria of the Hutzler Brothers department store. And I read that and I was like, wait a minute, what? 25% of the world's internet traffic runs through the basement of this building? The one built by the founders of Reformed Judaism in America, and that is absolutely littered with green men and other strange faces?
Yup.
How is that? This is a billion-dollar business operating out of a section of Howard Street that is a literal shithole. I wasn't joking about the piss-covered sidewalks. What the fuck is going on here? And so sure enough, the company operating this information superhighway beneath the city of Baltimore is called AiNET. And I love that phonetically it can be read as AiNET, as in, ain't it crazy that 25% of the world's internet traffic runs through the basement of this building? And so here we go with AiNET. And this Baltimore Magazine article is kind enough to let us know that AiNET has been at this location since no earlier than 2014, and that they have 24 workers on site, and that the company offers cloud storage, IT services, and cybersecurity, and that the telecom hotel located in the basement of this building has tenants that include Comcast and Verizon, the top 2 internet service providers in America, and who are allegedly competitors, right? So I hope they can play nice while staying at the same telecom hotel, right? And in fact, AiNET has 50% of all the emails, Amazon orders, Netflix streams, and iPhone downloads in the United States traveling through its telecom hotel superhighway. Right? This is crazy. Why here, of all places, in this building? And the founder of AiNET may have given us an answer to this question that he may not have given if he were asked. And so the founder of AiNET is one Deepak Jain, the son of Indian immigrant parents, who launches AiNET, a web hosting company, out of his parents' basement as a teenager attending Glen Elg High School. And so we get this 1-2 trope-a-dope combo of super genius child prodigy and starting a mega $1 million company out of your parents' basement or garage with Deepak here. And so by 1994, while in theory a pre-med sophomore at Johns Hopkins University, AiNET was already earning Deepak enough money to pay for his theoretical tuition. What does this mean that he was a student at Johns Hopkins in theory? Right? Did Deepak take a page from Reform Judaism and identify as a sophomore at Johns Hopkins? I don't know. I just love this language. And speaking of Johns Hopkins, Deepak's alleged presence there may also offer a clue as to why he chose this building. Because our boy Abram G endows a professorship in political economy to Johns Hopkins University, which is the study of how politics affects the economy and how the economy affects politics, right? So I suppose it's possible that Deepak could have learned about Abram G and his palace building while attending Johns Hopkins, if in fact he went there. But what a story, right? From still wetting the bed to marshaling 25% of the realm's internet traffic. And AiNET is even bigger than its commercial networking, because AiNET has federal contractors that Deepak can't mention in this Baltimore Magazine article. But he's just being coy, or he thinks the audience is stupid, because AiNET gives up their Glen Burnie facility, which is close to Fort Meade, right on their webpage. And so it's easy enough to figure out who some of these federal contractors may be, because Fort Meade, besides being the second largest army base in the continental U.S., is also home to the headquarters of the NSA, which is looking awfully Kaaba-esque, if you ask me. And Fort Meade is also home to the headquarters of the Defense Courier Service, the Defense Information Systems Agency, the U.S. Navy's Cryptologic Warfare Group 6, whatever the heck that is, and the United States Cyber Command. And so, with a mega installation close by, I'm guessing that Deepak's AiNET has contracts with some, if not all, of these agencies, potentially handling cybersecurity for some of the most sensitive, classified information you could imagine. And the cherry on top of all this Fort Meade stuff is that Fort Meade is also home to a unit of airborne, or the United States Army Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations Command, or USACPOCA. And so USACPOCA presumably conducts PSYOPs out of Fort Meade, and Fort Meade is connected to AiNET in Glen Burnie, and AiNET in Glen Burnie is connected to AiNET in Baltimore, and the owner of both went to Johns Hopkins, where Abram G. endows a professorship in political economics, how money influences politics, and also where the cobbler, who was Sun Yat-sen's godson, taught the CIA how to psyop from. So, this is just incredible. And Deepak and AiNET are also heavily invested in a Future Cities program for Baltimore, in which they've partnered with organizations including The Contemporary and the University of Maryland School of Social Work to reimagine and modernize the way residents interact with the arts, architecture, historic spaces, and how they access 21st century information. And I love this, right? It says, to read more about how AiNET and The Contemporary partnered to reintroduce the historic Hutzler Brothers Palace building to Baltimore, click here. And there was nothing to click there. Wah, wah. But regardless, this is a program which involves free citywide Wi-Fi for all. What could go wrong with everyone's wireless information being serviced by the same service provider who also provides services to all these military intelligence agencies, who most definitely aren't monitoring and influencing half of Gen Pop's digital information, right? Nope, nothing to see here, right? But it's okay, right? It's the government. Surely they would vet whomever they entrusted and contracted their cybersecurity to ensure the safety of Gen Pop's digital information, right? Wrong, right? Because it turns out that Deepak may have been a little deceitful in his practices and lied about just how secure his telecom hotels were. That AiNET only earned their safety certification in theory. And on October 15th, 2024, Deepak Jain was indicted by the federal government on 6 counts of major fraud against the Security and Exchange Commission. It was formed as a government watchdog group enforcing laws against corporate conspiracies like insider trading and things like that. And what I love about this is that FDR appoints as the first chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission Joseph P. Kennedy, who was one of the richest corporate type people in America at that time, and who was in no way a rum-running, murdering gangster during the Prohibition. It's just absolutely incredible. And so if the SEC is charging Deepak with 6 counts of major fraud, that tells me that AiNET was handling their digital security as well. And so now I think it's safe to assume that this same security fraud would be present in his dealings with these military intelligence agencies. If this information wasn't or isn't secure, then who the fuck knows who had or has access to it? Because not all that long ago, Baltimore City's entire intranet was held hostage. Could those cyber terrorists gotten their information from AiNET? Who knows what could be done with access to all this information, right? And make no mistake about it, this is a big story that got zero play in the media. Right? It's absolutely crazy. Not even a year and a half old, and the Justice Department has already archived these indictments. And Deepak has yet to stand trial. Who knows if he ever will? This case is so big that it makes me wonder if it was deliberately overshadowed and buried by recent fraud scandals like what's happening in Minnesota. Who knows? I don't know. All I know is that I think it's amazing that a story like this was just sitting there waiting to be found behind all these green men. And so before wrapping this one up, one of the reasons the building may have been chosen is because of the possible access it may have to the underground tunnels underneath Baltimore, making it very convenient for hiding or running all the wire you don't want people to see. And I think this because the author of the foreword to this book says, and I quote, "My earliest recollection of going to Hutzler's was the downstairs luncheonette and hearing the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad trains rumble underneath." And so who knows what the expanse of such a tunnel system is? Certainly not me, but it certainly is super convenient for a data center. And to wrap it up, one last reason that I have that may have influenced Deepak Jain's choice of the Hutzler Brothers Palace building for AiNET is that all this green man motif stuff has its origins in the arabesque, which add a distinct Middle Eastern Islamic influence to the design. And when I read that, my apophenia went bing, 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 right to the McMecca alignment and all of this Islamic influence I'm finding all over Baltimore. It's just unbelievable. But the reason this may have appealed to Deepak is because the arabesque actually has its origins in India, and the carvings that appear on, wait for it, Jain temples. And to top this one off with a delightfully ironic cherry, one of the major symbols of the Hindu practice of Jainism is the swastika. You just cannot make this stuff up. All right, so that's all I have for this one. Remember, guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? So cheers.